Materialism has been a problem for centuries. It seems to be as old as humanity itself. But that materialistic outlook seems to be accelerating into the kind of narcissistic greed and selfishness that you see running rampant in our culture. The Word of God says much about the problems of that kind of greed. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 15, the statement is made in verse 27 and 28. Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. There's just a couple of chapters after that. Chapter 17, verse 15 and 16. He who justifies the wicked and who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Why should a fool have money in his hand to buy wisdom when he has no sense? Interesting question. Just a few chapters after that, in chapter 22, verse number 7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender. And then the very next chapter, chapter 23, verse 4 and verse 5. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it's gone. It suddenly sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. The wealth that you strive so much to attain may be gone in the blink of an eye. The Old Testament prophet Amos has much to say about the kind of problematic materialism that became commonplace in the nation of Israel. In fact, in Amos, he starts talking about all the people around them and how terrible they are. And you can see the crowd growing as they're excited. He's talking about their enemies, and then finally he turns the tables and talks about them. And this is what he says. For 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and turn aside the way of the afflicted. He continues. But that kind of attitude of me, myself, and I seems more and more pervasive in our culture. And talking about those verses out of the book of Amos, a book titled Godly Materialism, and it's not a contradictory statement. A person can live a godly life in the way that he uses the blessings around them, but it's a big temptation to do otherwise. The author writes this. Amos exposes the root of their evil when he says that they do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Their whole spirituality expresses a lack of proper sacred grief for the suffering around them and about them. These are the leading figures of Israel. They identify themselves with the majestic power and glory of King David. But they know nothing of the passion and sacred grief for the nation and its poor, to which the songs and music of David attest. They've lost touch with brokenness and thus have lost their own souls. Their celebrations have become frivolous, disgusting, and pathetic displays of self-indulgence. Does it seem to describe a large part of our culture today? In the last chapter of the letter that Paul writes to Timothy, the first letter, chapter 6, he says this beginning in verse 9. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. Not the root of all evil, but a root of evil. And it continues down to verse 17 by describing the rich this way and how we need to address them. Charge them not to be arrogant, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life itself. What's problematic in our culture are individuals that want to push the problems off on somebody else or throw money at the problem as though the problem will solve itself. I'm not going to take responsibility for it. I'm not going to acknowledge that maybe I'm partially to blame. And I'm not going to allow people to say, well, you didn't come up with a solution. I don't want to come up with a solution. I just want to pass it off on somebody else. Sounds like a lot like the government of this nation. What's involved in riches? Responsibility to use them wisely. To turn away from things that actually are corrupt in their nature. Disdainful in the way that they make use of those who are less fortunate. We need to be better than that. The love of money, not money, but the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. You see those in power who seem to be incessantly finding ways or wanting to find ways to amass a great deal of wealth. And it seems like they can care less about the problems at hand. Pray for our nation. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.